Welcome to Prescribed by Dr. Nathan Goodyear, where integrative oncology meets holistic healing. This podcast is your home for the latest in innovation, exploration, and elevation in all areas of integrative oncology, medicine, health, wellness, and beyond. Join me and a host of other innovators as we go from practicing to prescribing. Your daily dose of wellness begins now. Ivermectin repurposed or rejected. I've talked a lot about ivermectin over the years, been using it in the arena of integrative oncology since 2017. Of course, I actually have a course on it, metabolicregen.com, where you can dive deep into the pharmacokinetics of ivermectin and beyond. This is really just to provide a summary and kind of update of some studies from 2025 on ivermectin. Now, the first study published looking at ivermectin as a repurposed medication in the treatment of cancer, what's called repurposed medication oncology, was actually in 1988. And since that time, there's been an accelerating trend from 1988 to current of studies looking at ivermectin as a repurposed medication in oncology. And of course, everybody knows across, take your platform pick, there's a lot of amazing things mentioned about ivermectin. I'm a believer in ivermectin as a repurposed medication in oncology. But is it a magic bullet to cure cancer? There's no magic bullet to cure cancer. Not a chemotherapy, not a radiation, not an immunotherapy, not a repurposed medication. Repurposed medications shine in conjunction, in synergy with other therapeutics, and ivermectin is no different. And we'll touch on some of the mechanisms in just a moment. Now, the story of discovery of ivermectin is important. Steve Jobs said, we can only connect the dots to the future by connecting them to the past. So we got to understand the history, the origin of ivermectin. It was the origin of an international public-private sector partnership between Amora, the head of antibiotics research group at Tokyo's Kitasato Institute, and William Campbell at Merck and Sharp. Now, this was first isolated by the Kitasato Institute in Tokyo in 1975. It was a single-cell organism. They isolated Ivermectin, Avermectin, from the single-cell organism from a single Japanese soil sample. Now, the first publication on Ivermectin was in 1979. So discovery 1975, first publication in 1979 as it relates to Ivermectin. Kathleen Rudy, a friend of mine, she has referenced ivermectin as actually a bioweapon. And when you think about it, it makes sense because a single-cell organism doesn't have an immune system, and yet it's going to be under constant attack. Enemies are all around it. And so it needs a weapon, a biological weapon, a weapon that can alter the biology of other organisms to protect itself. So here, this single-cell organism was using ivermectin as its biological weapon. And so translate that to the human experience, and we can understand how the synthetically derived ivermectin from the parent ivermectin can be used as a similar biological weapon. And I've often described ivermectin's story of discovery through four components. Wonder drug, when it first hit the market, it was called a wonder drug left and right. Wonder dog, when it first made its move into the clinical in the veterinarian world in 1981, it was described as a wonder drug, but in the wonder animal species, so that's why I called it the wonder dog. And it became instrumental through all of the veterinarian community. But then, as everything changed, moving into the pandemic, it became a wonder dud. Everything got turned up on its head. Now, we have to understand the context of the pandemic of SARS-CoV-2. We have a virus. Nobody's ever seen it before. The impact of the immune system and collateral damage never been seen before, and no therapy is effective against it. So what are doctors and hospitals to do? But to use that which is readily available to try to help the patient to live another day until we maybe get a new effective therapy. And that's exactly what was happening during the early phases of the pandemic. And ivermectin, Ivermectin, was used to actually work to reduce inflammation, actually work as a part antiviral, because there had been some studies that actually show it had antiviral activity. But because of some of the politics that infused there, basically ivermectin, or anybody that was a proponent of it, though there was really no effective therapy at the time to try to help these patients live another day, those that used it became ostracized, they became marginalized. And instead of a public burning at the stake, they had the digital burning of the stake, if you will. Many great doctors sacrificed a lot to speak truth to the general masses. So it became a wonder dud. But now as researchers continue to grow, that wonder drug turned wonder dud turned into a wonder cancer drug. So more and more research is coming out that ivermectin actually has profound positive impacts in the fight against cancer. Now, FDA approval is a different process. FDA approval for ivermectin in human use is very concise. It was approved in 1987 for onchocerciasis, that's river blindness. 1996, it was added in for strongyloidiasis, and then in 2012 it was approved for head lice. So you can see parasitic, this is where the FDA approval aligns. Now off-label indications, lymphatic filariasis, ascariasis, trichuriasis, enterobiasis, and ectoparasites. You can't say one of those words correctly one time, so there we're just trying to say them 3 times. But these are all parasitics, but here it's not that they're FDA approved, but that they're being used off-label, off-indication. But here, in viruses, autoimmune cancer, that's really kind of off-label, becomes really off-label from those in the conventional arm. They can't see that it has any impact in the treatment of viruses. That was the whole pandemic issue. Autoimmune disease, what modulates the immune system, been shown to turn cold tumors hot. And then as an effective anti-cancer therapy, again, it's going to shine in conjunction with other therapies when it's stacked. So what's the available research on ivermectin? And this is where we have to be honest. I love ivermectin, I love integrative oncology. We have to understand the pros and the cons, the positives and the limitations of research. So the available research on ivermectin is the majority of it is in vitro and in vivo. These are preclinical studies. These are not human trials. Very, very limited early stage human clinical trial on ivermectin. Again, almost all of it in vitro, in vivo. Studies are very small, which tends to lean towards bias. There's no large-scale randomized controlled trials. Human studies have been limited to case reports, phase 1, phase 2, which you'll see, but these are extremely limited. There's no long-term studies of its use, so when those say that it's safer than ivermectin, first of all, ivermectin is safer than Tylenol. The problem there is Tylenol used over the counter is not necessarily safe. That's the problem, is people use it off indication. And if ivermectin is used off indication, meaning over the counter, might people do the same thing they do with Tylenol? So that's the whole issue there. What's the dosing long term? What's the optimal strategy of delivery? These are things yet to be determined. Again, we must focus that the majority of research is preclinical, but we need to translate this to the clinical to help our patients to today. Now, pharmacokinetics is looking at how the medication is liberated, absorbed, distributed, metabolized, and excreted in the process of its clinical efficacy. It can be delivered orally, can be delivered transdermally, rectally, intraperitoneally, or intratumorally, which is what we do at the Williams Cancer Institute. Now, I want to focus on the specifics of where we are in cancer treatment, because the way cancer treatment has been is there's been kind of 2 arms to it. It's been go to war, chemotherapy, radiation, surgery, or there's been to just throw it on the wall and hope it sticks, hope it works. But we're in an arena now where no longer is a one-size-fits-all approach applicable. We need to focus on precision cancer care, the right treatment for the right patient, the right combination at the right time. And that's really where we are in looking at what are called the hallmarks of cancer. And we'll touch on those in just a second. But when we look at the published anti-cancer mechanisms of action, of course, check out the show notes of this video and you'll get access to these. It inhibits cancer growth. It inhibits cancer recruitment of new blood vessels. That's neoangiogenesis. It inhibits cancer metastasis, spreading. It promotes programmed cancer cell death, inhibits angiogenesis. It's an immunomodulator. That's why we use it. It stimulates autophagy. It promotes pyroptosis, another form of programmed cell death. It reverses multi-drug resistance. It augments immune checkpoint inhibitors. That's why we use it. It augments chemotherapy. Again, synergy. It induces oxidative stress, promotes energy crisis, inhibits mitochondrial biogenesis. It's an epigenetic regulator, and it targets and inhibits cancer stem cells. So these are just very, very broader published areas where ivermectin has shown anti-cancer activities. Again, the vast majority of it, almost all of it, is preclinical in vitro in vivo. But what about more specific? And that's where we get into these hallmarks of cancer. Hanahan and Weinberg first touched on these in 2000, updated them in 2011, and then in 2022. The original hallmarks of cancer were published in 2000. Again, check out the notes of this video. You can see the access of the studies and read them yourself. But what we have are the first 6: sustaining proliferative signaling, evading growth suppressors, resisting cell death, enabling replicative immortality, inducing angiogenesis, blood vessel supply growth, and activating invasion and metastasis. These are very targetable hallmarks of cancer. So no longer can we say, well, why are we using this therapeutic, repurposed medication? People are still using repurposed medication without intent, without precision. When we use repurposed medications like ivermectin, we must say, well, we are using this because we have evidence of increased angiogenesis in this tumor type with you via vascular endothelial growth factor being expressed, so we want to target that with ivermectin. Now, these hallmarks of cancer were updated by Hanahan in 2011, what they called emerging hallmarks and enabling characteristics. The emerging hallmarks include deregulating cellular energetics, avoiding immune destruction. That kind of makes sense. That's a rate-limiting step in how cancer survives and spreads. The enabling characteristics included genomic instability and mutation, and then tumor-promoting inflammation. 2011. In 2022, further updates, they've not updated since then, include unlocking phenotypic plasticity, non-mutational epigenetic reprogramming. I think you're going to hear a lot about reprogramming in the future. Polymorphic microbiomes, gut microbiome, tumor microbiome, critical for the future, and senescent cell influence. And you're going to see from a book that Dr. Williams and I have coming out soon, we're going to talk a lot about cell senescence. So let's focus on ivermectin with the precision of these hallmarks of cancer. What has research shown? Well, 2016 study showing that the resisting cell death hallmark of cancer, ivermectin induces autophagy and apoptosis. Now, autophagy is that kind of spring cleaning, but apoptosis is a programmed cell death that would lead to destruction of the tumor and thus activation of the immune system. It's been shown to activate cytosolic autophagy by inhibiting the PAC1-AKT signaling pathway, and this will suppress tumor growth. So again, precision, precise delivery of ivermectin for an intended purpose. The second hallmark of cancer that ivermectin has been shown to target is sustaining proliferative signaling. Everybody looks at cancer as something that proliferates indefinitely, and to do that, it needs to signal and promote signaling that allows it to do that. Well, ivermectin, via 2021 and two 2021 articles, which you'll see in the show notes, actually inhibits proliferation. Ivermectin suppresses the proliferation of various cancer cell lines. Again, preclinical in vitro, including pancreatic cells, by inducing mitochondrial dysfunction. So not only the mechanism, but what they're looking at, the cancer cell type, but also how they're looking at it, and that's the in vitro. And again, you can say, well, that's a limitation, and that'd be true. But again, we have to translate this to the clinical to help our patients today because ivermectin is safe. Is it safer than Tylenol, as some say? I have my concerns because Tylenol is safe, but people don't use it as it's clinically indicated. So we'll see how that goes, unfortunately. I would encourage you to please talk to your doctor about the ivermectin, the dose you're doing or using, because I do see that it can have side effects with my patients. Now, the third hallmark of cancer is evading growth suppression. So obviously if cancer is growing, it wants to evade the body's ability to suppress its growth. Here, it can target the ability to overcome drug resistance. So ivermectin has been reported to reverse multi-drug resistance in a variety of cancer cell lines by modulating the epidermal growth factor receptor pathway. So it can modulate where resistance is developed and overcome that, and hereby targeting EGFR. This was shown in a 2019 study and a 2007 from European Journal of Pharmacology. Evading immune destruction. This is a key rate-limiting step in how cancer will spread and survive. So here we can modulate the tumor microenvironment to ensure a cold tumor actually becomes hot, where immune system can become activated. And this is what I've already referenced, where ivermectin can turn cold tumors hot. A cold tumor is either two parts. One that's immune desert, that's cold, meaning there's no immune activity, or there's up to 50% in addition to that 25%, so all the way up to 75%, that can be immune maladaptive. So even the immune system's either not present or the immune system is there as pro-tumor, it's maladaptive. But with ivermectin, we can actually turn that cold tumor, make it hot, allow the immune system to infiltrate and shift from a pro-tumor to anti-tumor. and that was from a 2016 study entitled An Antihelmintic Drug, Ivermectin Inhibits Angiogenesis Growth and Survival of Glioblastoma Through Inducing Mitochondrial Dysfunction and Oxidative Stress. Now, again, there are toxicities associated with ivermectin. Angioedema, Stevens-Johnson syndrome, cardiac toxicity, I've not seen that. Liver toxicity, not seen that. Renal toxicity, not seen that, but these have been reported. Visual impairment, I have seen that in 2 patients with brain mets. In fact, one patient, it basically provided the symptom unmasking that eventually resulted in MRI verifying the tumor. Seizures, I've seen that in one patient. Respiratory failure, coma, I have not. But there have been case reports of that where people are overutilizing the ivermectin in terms of dose. Stacking, this is the synergy of ivermectin in conjunction with other therapeutics. Other integrative therapies, ivermectin, vitamin C, again, check out the notes for the supporting evidence to read for yourself. Ivermectin plus hyperthermia, stacking. Ivermectin plus other repurposed medications, metformin. Ivermectin and other repurposed medications here, looking at the orthomolecular protocol of ivermectin, fenbendazole, though fenbendazole is a benzimidazole that I would not advocate for, but mebendazole is an FDA approved product for human consumption for parasites, but it is benzimidazole, which we have greater evidence of how to utilize it, how to dose it as a repurposed medication in oncology. Stacking ivermectin with chemotherapy, a couple different studies, 2022 and 2022, well actually both 2022, show that it actually can augment and synergize chemotherapy. Augment immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy. From a conventional standpoint, immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy is immunotherapy, but it's not the only immunotherapy that's available. And here ivermectin has been shown, and this is where the only human trial ongoing is being used in conjunction with immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy. Talk about that in just a second. So let's talk about some 2025 ivermectin research updates, because here we are, December 2025. I want to give you some few insights as to what has been published this year. Not social media, but actual research or reviews. There was a 2025 study, Ivermectin in Cancer Treatment, Should Healthcare Providers Caution or Explore Its Therapeutic Potential? Well, if it's safe, and we know how to dose it, and dose it safely in the long term, why not use it as a synergistic therapy? Because those who fear it don't want to try. What it's been shown to in this review, it's been shown to inhibit proliferation and induce apoptosis, programmed cell death. Well, those are both beneficial things that can augment conventional cancer treatments. It's been shown to do this through modulation of pathways like WNT, beta-catenin, or AKT-mTOR. So there's not just the broader aspects, proliferation, apoptosis, but also the specific mechanisms by which it does it. Again, and it's safe. Another research article here in a review, Ivermectin as an alternative anti-cancer agent, a review of chemical properties and therapeutics. Now, this is a comprehensive review of ivermectin's chemical structure, function, pharmacokinetics, and its proposal as a repurposed medication in oncology. Again, same process, modulation of the Wnt or WNT beta-catenin, P13K AKT mTOR pathway modulation, and many, many others involved by ivermectin's impact on cancer. And I think this is important to understand. Just because ivermectin is an antiparasitic and it's treating here pathways involved with signaling doesn't mean it is a treatment that cancer is in and of itself a parasitic infection, meaning is it's full of parasites. Because what you're seeing here is ivermectin is targeting signaling pathways, these hallmarks of cancer that are going to be common to parasites. But that does not create the faulty connection to mean that cancer is full of parasites. Yes, there are certain cancers that can cause certain parasites that can cause cancer, but they are not equatable to the same just because an antiparasitic can treat both. Another study, ivermectin inhibits epithelial to mesenchymal transition via the WNT signaling in endocrine-resistant breast cancers. Now, this was an interesting study because it was a cell culture, so it was just cell lines, not an animal or a human trial, of course. But what they did is by giving ivermectin, they were able to see the inhibition of these two cell lines, breast cancer, within 24 hours of treatment. There was a 50% reduction in cell motility and a 62 and 35% decrease in the cell invasion of the two different cell lines, respectively. This also was shown to reduce metastatic markers of what's called vimentin and SNEL, which are typically upregulated in cancer. So here, they're actually talking about how ivermectin in cell culture is being shown to inhibit the epithelial to mesenchymal transition. Now, that concept is epithelial immobile, fixed, that's the characteristics, to mesenchymal, which is more mobile, motile, and characteristic of mesenchymal cells. So when a cancer cell goes from epithelial to mesenchymal, it's moving from immobile to mobile. Here, ivermectin can come in there and inhibit that process. And by the way, if you inhibit the metastatic process, you're inhibiting 90% of why morbidity and mortality exist. Anti-tumor potential of ivermectin against T-cell lymphoma bearing host. Here, ivermectin being shown to actually induce cell cycle arrest in the G0, G1 phase and lead to mitochondrial membrane potential disruption and apoptosis, programmed cell death. 2025 update again, ivermectin in cancer, 2025 internet trends, scientific data, ongoing trials, and news coverage published in the Annals of Oncology. Here they looked at 50 preclinical studies and said that, okay, this is where the evidence lies, but there's only one active human trial. Again, it's focusing on the reality of where the research is, but then we must translate that for human use because it is safe. But we do understand we need more studies there. We need more evidence. Is it the magic bullet? There is no such thing as a magic bullet, as Paul Ehrlich described in the early 20th century, but it is an augmentative synergistic therapy to help us fight cancer. And finally, the actual human clinical trial ongoing, ivermectin in combination with balstilimab or pembrolizumab in patients with metastatic triple-negative breast cancer. Little stop and pause there. Whoever comes up with the names of these drugs should be tarred and feathered. These are targeted and immunodrug. This is a targeted drug, balstilimab, and then pembrolizumab is Keytruda. That's an immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy. But here, what we have is a human clinical trial where ivermectin is being used in conjunction with a targeted med and an immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy in patients with metastatic triple-negative breast cancer. Super excited to see what the outcomes of this are. It's a phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 is just looking at safety. Phase 2 is looking at safety and efficacy. So it should give us some insight into the efficacy of ivermectin as a synergistic therapy here with targeted med and an immune checkpoint inhibiting therapy. So that's a brief synopsis of ivermectin. Great therapeutic, repurposed medication in oncology that I've been using since 2017. I've seen it be almost uniformly safe, and I've seen it almost uniformly being synergistic with a wide variety of therapeutics, but equally so, I've seen it be uniformly misunderstood by most in conventional medicine, conventional oncology, most importantly, the politicians. So if you want to learn more about ivermectin, I encourage you to go deeper dive on our prior podcasts on pre-scribe.com. Also go over to metabolicregen.com where you can actually find the 5-course module on the repurposed medications, the introduction that include a history, include ivermectin, mebendazole, fenbendazole, and mebendazole versus fenbendazole. Dr. Nathan Goodyear here. I hope you like this content. If you do, I encourage you to please like, share, and subscribe, and share it with those that you think would benefit from this information and others. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your 2025, and may 2026 be a blessing. Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Prescribe Podcast. All references supporting this episode can be found on the prescribe.com website. That's pre-scribe.com. To get your next dose of medical innovation, make sure you subscribe to Prescribe. We'll see you for your next refill.